Hi, my name's Caroline. On this channel you can find a lot of different types of videos, but today's video is in the style of commentary. I will be discussing the Hulu documentary series Quiet on Set, and I'll be using it as a jumping off point to discuss child exploitation in Hollywood as a whole. One thing that you will not see in this video is any clips of children that are being exploited. There is plenty of that in the actual documentary series, Quiet on Set, but I do not want to further circulate images that I think are inappropriate of people who were children at that time. We're also going to be getting a little bit into the history of exploitation of children in Hollywood, and I'm going to be describing shows and clips that you probably haven't seen. I will provide the sources for everything that I discuss in this video, and if you really need to, you can go look it up for yourself. But I just don't feel comfortable sharing the actual images of the things I found, even though they are available and out there. I just don't want my page to be the place that you can find them. Okay, let's get started. So, what is Quiet on Set? It is a 4-part documentary series that is available for streaming on Discovery Plus, Hulu, and Max that explores the dark side of children's entertainment and children's television, primarily focusing on one man, Dan Schneider, a writer, director, producer, and showrunner for Nickelodeon from the years 1994 to 2019. Dan Schneider has been accused of numerous offenses against children, working them too hard, creating abusive and toxic sets for his actors and his employees. But the primary thing that the documentary series focused on was Dan Schneider's overt sexualization of children on his shows. Everything from one-liners to costumes to the premises of sketches and the plots of episodes themselves were seen as an opportunity to sneak adult content into kids' shows. Children's programming, definitely the programming that Dan Schneider was making, tells its audience how to react. It has a laugh track that tells kids what they're supposed to think is funny. And it goes beyond telling them what they're supposed to think is funny. It teaches them what they think is funny. When kids laugh at a girl getting squirted in the face with goo on one of Dan Schneider's shows, they aren't laughing because they know the joke that Dan Schneider's trying to make. They are laughing because they are told to laugh. There's the laugh track right there saying this is the funny part. They are laughing because mess. When you're a kid, mess is the joke. You don't need a joke beyond, oh, there's something messy about this. The joke is something unexpected happens. That's a joke in the world of kids. But the joke isn't just mess. It isn't just unexpected, because this content is not being created and written by kids. It's being created and written by adults. Adults that know full well the potential implications of goo on the face. And this stuff is being approved. It was being approved by adults every step of the way. It didn't just go from Dan Schneider's mind directly to our televisions. It went from Dan Schneider to the writing room, to another group of executives that have to approve of this. This is greenlit. This is recorded. There are dozens, if not hundreds of adults that have seen what is going to be put on TV before it is put on TV. In his own defense, Dan Schneider has brought up these people and said, look, there were a ton of other people on these sets. There were a ton of other people that were approving of this stuff. And in a sense, I think that he's right. I don't mean that he's not wrong. Oh, he is very, very wrong. But this isn't about one bad apple. This isn't a story about one man who corrupted a beautiful system. This is about a system that creates and encourages and pays apples that are exactly like Dan Schneider. It would be easy and convenient to walk away from Quiet on Set with the impression that this is essentially a Dan Schneider issue, and that as long as we keep him away from Hollywood, the kids will be safe. I think it would be easy to walk away with that impression, because I don't think that the documentary series goes far enough to tell the viewer that this is not just a Dan Schneider issue, this is not just a Nickelodeon issue, this is a Hollywood issue. As long as Hollywood has existed, the exploitation of children has flourished in Hollywood. But this is ultimately a Hollywood production, and I don't think that the leaders in Hollywood are eager to fundamentally change the way that they operate, which would be what needs to happen in order for kids to be safe in Hollywood. So I just don't know if that's a conversation you're going to see be funded by anyone in Hollywood right now. Okay, let's talk about all the elements that come together to make Hollywood the hot den of exploitation that it is. Number one being that everybody's a dreamer. Not everybody, that's hyperbole. I'm trying to avoid hyperbole, but most people in Hollywood are dreamers. If you, like me, have ever expressed a desire out loud to become an actor or a writer or a singer or a director, you know that most people respond with, okay, cute. What's your plan B? It's really hard to do that. It's really hard. Everybody wants that. Everybody in the whole world wants to become a Hollywood actor. So no offense, but that's probably not going to happen, right? So the people that actually go to Hollywood have a wild dream that's kind of framed in the same way that winning the lottery is framed. And so any opportunity they get, they are primed and ready to be too grateful for. What do I mean by too grateful? When you feel like you're the luckiest person in the world to have your job, you are not likely to stand up for yourself if you are asked to do something that you are uncomfortable doing, because everybody knows that in Hollywood, especially if this is your first or second gig, there is a line out the door of people willing to do that exact same job and willing to take over your role at the drop of a hat. All the time, adults in Hollywood agree to things that they don't want to agree to, and they do things that they're not comfortable doing because they're made to feel so grateful. They're the luckiest people in the world, right? There's no room for anything but gratitude from the luckiest people in the world. They also know that all it takes is one toe over the line, one too many objections to unethical treatment for them to legitimately be blacklisted from Hollywood, never working again in that industry. If you were working at a restaurant and your boss was treating you and your fellow employees unethically and you spoke up about it, you could be fired in retaliation, and your boss could say that you'll never work in the restaurant industry again, but that would be a pretty hollow threat. There would be no way for him to contact every restaurant in the world and make it so that you can't work at a restaurant again. But if you work in Hollywood and you piss off the wrong person, and they say you'll never work in this town again, that could very well be the reality, because the people at the top have a gargantuan amount of power over everybody else's careers. But though adult actors are asked to do things that are inappropriate all the time, they are ultimately adults with autonomy, and they can stand up for themselves and they can say no to doing something that they think is inappropriate, even if it does cost them that job or even their entire career in the entertainment industry. Whereas children are being asked to do inappropriate things, and they do not know that they are inappropriate to do. They may have some instinct, some gut feeling that there's something weird or off about that thing, but ultimately it is up to the adults in the room to speak up for them, and they don't have a voice or an avenue to express discomfort with these things other than the channels of adults that are set before them. And we'll talk about that. Let's talk about the law and lack thereof. The Fair Labor Standards Act is the law that established the federal minimum wage. It also established a minimum working age and regulated working conditions in a number of industries. The Fair Labor Standards Act does not eliminate child labor in the United States. It just regulates child labor in the United States. It does make it illegal to hire young children in most industries, but it allows for children as young as 14 in most industries, and it allows for children as young as 12 in agriculture. As we discuss kids who are working in Hollywood, I think it's important to remember the kids who are working everywhere else and to remember that capitalism is a system about profit, and it prioritizes an employer's ability to make profit. And when there are laws that regulate the employment of children and other working conditions, those are in spite of capitalism. Those are not because of capitalism. Those are socialist unionizing ideas seeping into our capitalist society because we have standards, ethical and moral standards. These laws are just holding capitalism to some sort of ethical and moral standard. But make no mistake that these laws could be so much stricter if they actually were concerned about the safety of children more than they were concerned about profits. But because these laws still hold profits up to be this important thing, they allow for things like 12-year-old agricultural workers. If you want your kid to start working before they turn 12, don't worry, Hollywood is here for you. In Hollywood, your child only has to be 15 days old to start working. We're going to go through the regulations for employing children in Hollywood, and I'll let you decide for yourself whether you think they go far enough to protect the best interest of children on sets. Infants aged 15 days to 6 months can only work for 20 minutes a day, and in California, work includes hair, wardrobe, and makeup. They can be on set for up to 2 hours at a time, from 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., or from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Now, these first laws might lure you into the sense that California cares about these kids because they seem to be rooted in at least some basic childhood development. They seem to be based around a young baby's nap schedule, only allowing the babies on set from 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 or from 1:30 to 3 seems reasonable. Only allowing them to be in hair and makeup or on camera for 20 minutes seems reasonable if you think that it's reasonable for kids to work. Next, we have babies and toddlers aged 6 months to 2 years, and the amount of work they're allowed to do really ramps up here. These little ones can work up to 2 hours a day, and they can be on set for up to 4 hours a day. Now, as far as how many hours of work is a good amount of work for a 6-month-old to a 2-year-old, I lean towards 0 work, but hey, that's just me. Let's see. From 2 to 5 years old, the children are allowed to work 3 hours a day and be on set up to 4.5 hours a day. Why waste time in preschool when you can be earning your family money? That's what I've always been asking. Then you have 6 to 8-year-olds, and they are able to work for 4 hours a day. If you're worried they're not going to be able to bond with their coworkers because they're going to have to go to school, don't worry, they don't have to go to school. They can have instruction from an on-set teacher, and the requirement is only 3 hours of instruction a day. I mean, the stuff you learn from ages 6 to 8 is all fluff anyway, right? Reading, writing, math, who needs that? A 9th birthday is a reason to celebrate in Hollywood because it means more work, so much more work. A 9 to 15-year-old can work up to 5 hours a day and spend up to 9 hours and 30 minutes a day on set. And they are still only required to receive 3 hours of instruction throughout their day from the designated studio teacher. And finally, once a child turns 16, they can take the California High School Proficiency Exam. And if they pass the California High School Proficiency Exam, they are legally an adult on set, and none of the protections for minors apply to them anymore. Let me read you a little quote from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Any employer in the entertainment industry desiring to employ minors in any such work or activity not hazardous or detrimental to the health, safety, morals, or education of minors shall make application to the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement for a permit to employ minors. So according to the law, a production cannot hire children if it could be potentially morally hazardous to that child or jeopardize their education. Now, I think most of these productions are morally hazardous, but moral is not an objective thing where you can say, oh, this set is moral and this set is not moral. So this is an entirely unenforceable part of the law where anyone could argue that anything is moral because we all have a different set of standards for that. But in terms of education, I would argue that any set that is using the full extent of the law in terms of how much they're working the kids on their production is inherently harmful to the education of those children, because that is 3 hours. They're only required to receive 3 hours of instruction a day, and this isn't 3 hours of instruction from a teacher in their specific grade or specific subjects. A studio teacher is responsible for the education of all the minors on set. So this person might be helping you with some printed out problems and you're in 10th grade, but also might be helping a first grader at the same time. Even if they were the most talented, adept teacher out there, 3 hours a day is not what's legally required of everybody else. Everybody else is required to go to school for much longer than 3 hours a day. And if you grow up a Hollywood child, this is a consistently lacking education you're receiving at every step of the way, where from the age of 6 to the age of 16, you are only learning the bare minimum to get through that level. If the law was really focused on these children, it would make room for their education. If you wanted to make a law that made room for their education, and you also don't believe that Hollywood is inherently harmful to children, you could make it so that productions have to work around school. When I was in high school and middle school, I used to go straight from school to dance, and I would be there from like 4 to 9. I know that's kind of a long time, but you could argue that it's not too bad because it's comparable to other extracurriculars. You could make the law that you can only employ children in production from 4 to 9 on school days, and then from a certain time to a certain time on weekends. But they're not going to do that, because these laws are built so that productions can work these kids as much as they do, and they can still say, we're in the confines of the law. We're doing things by the book. Yeah, the book is trash, but that doesn't matter. We're not responsible for the book. Now let's talk about the studio teacher. What is a studio teacher? Well, let's start with the obvious. The studio teacher is responsible for the education and instruction of minors on entertainment industry sets. They're required to have a state certification in both primary and secondary education, which makes sense because they're likely to be responsible for some 6-year-olds and some 15-year-olds on the exact same production. But a studio teacher's job isn't just to teach. A studio teacher is, by law, responsible for caring and attending to the health, safety, and morals of minors under 16 years of age. They are required to take note of the working conditions, physical surroundings, signs of mental health issues, or physical fatigue in the minors under their charge. They have to weigh the demands placed on the child based on the kid's age, ability, strength, and stamina, and it is their responsibility to speak up if they believe anyone is demanding too much of that child. Let's sit with that. Okay, so rather than make a production responsible for creating a safe environment for the children and for not asking the kids to do things that are unsafe or morally unsound for them to be doing, this law just puts this one individual in between the children and anything that the production wants to throw at them. In between the child and essentially capitalism. And capitalism will work these kids to the bone because that's what capitalism does. It works all of us to the bone because we are only as valuable as the profit that we bring in. So they are not asking productions and studios to act like human beings who care about other human beings. They're not asking that. They're allowing studios to continue to act in the way that corporations act, which is not with anybody's safety or best interest in mind. It's with the bottom line in mind. And they are putting just one individual in between the kid and the system. Did I mention who's responsible for hiring the studio teacher? It's the studio. Yeah, the studio gets to pick who's gonna be the little warrior for the kids on set. The studio hires that person. I want us to all understand the power dynamics at play here. You've got one teacher that is hired by the production, and they're responsible for speaking up when, let's say, the director wants to continue filming this scene outside in freezing temperatures, and the little kid that you're in charge of is shaking like a leaf, but he's saying, I can do this, I've got this, I don't want to make anyone mad. The director is saying, let's just get this done. You have to be the person that pisses off everybody. That's your job as the studio teacher, is to say, halt, halt, halt. I know you're all having a grand old time. I know you're all cooking with fire. I hate to get in between creatives and their creative process. But hey, could we consider this child? And it would be one thing if every child had their own studio teacher. I don't think that would be great, but it would still be one thing. But if it's not school in session time, only one teacher is required for every 20 children. And if school is in session, one teacher is required for every 10 children. But as I'm telling you, they're not just responsible for the education. They're responsible for noticing everything. If you're the studio teacher, you have 20 kids on a set that you're responsible for speaking up for. And let's say you're on one end of the set watching one child because he's doing some type of risky stunt with wax or whatever else, these Dan Schneider types will throw at these kids. But then at the other end of the set, something else is happening that you should be standing in between, that you need to speak up about. I'm sure you're starting to see some of the potential pitfalls with this studio teacher system, but unfortunately it does get worse. A parent or guardian is required to be within sight or sound of their child at all times on set, except when their kid is in the designated private education area with their studio teacher. In fact, nobody is allowed in the designated education area besides the studio teacher and the students. If you are thinking that this sounds like a dangerous amount of access and alone time for one individual to have with all of these already exploited children, you would not be wrong. In 2014, 2 men were found to have been using fake IDs and credentials to work on dozens of low-budget and student productions. They were both found to have been using the same alias, which was the name of a retired studio teacher, in their con. A year later, another imposter was found, only after the mother of one of the kids that he taught complained about his behavior. He had been able to work on 7 productions before he was caught. There is a website that lists all of the names and certifications of studio teachers in California, and this man didn't even use an alias. And he was able to work on 7 productions. 7 times a production failed to even look this guy up in a database. And these are just the stories that are high profile enough to reach the news. Are you depressed yet? because it's about to get a little bit more depressing. We're going to be talking about the history of sexualization of children in Hollywood. As soon as I saw Quiet on Set, I knew that Dan Schneider was nothing new, and it took very little, alarmingly little research to find evidence of that. In 1932, a 3-year-old Shirley Temple starred in War Babies as a sex worker named Charmaine. She wore an off-the-shoulder blouse and a cloth diaper affixed with an oversized safety pin. 2 little boys played soldiers/Johns in War Babies, and they just wore diapers. I knew about Shirley Temple in the movie War Babies before I started making this video and before I watched Quiet on the Set. When I started looking into the history of the sexualization of children in Hollywood, I started there. Then I decided to fast forward about 20 years and see if we were still dealing with the same type of sexualization in the 50s. I Googled the most popular shows for kids in the 1950s, and one that came up was Make Room for Daddy. The title, Make Room for Daddy, kind of stood out to me, so I decided to watch an episode, and I landed on Season 1, Episode 2. These are a few of the things that stood out to me in Season 1, Episode 2 of this show, the only episode of this show that I watched, and the one that I picked at random upon hearing the title of the show. At 1 minute and 48 seconds, Daddy says, "You know what, Benny? There's nothing in the whole world like little girls." Benny says, "There's nothing wrong with the big ones either." And then Daddy says, "You know what it is to come home and have that pink bundle run up to you, jump in your lap, throw her arms around you, and give you a big old hug and a big kiss and say, 'Daddy, I love you, Daddy.'" Sure, you could argue that there's nothing weird or creepy about that, but then we go on to Your Daddy's Bride, which is a song that is sang at 10 minutes and 29 seconds through the episode. Maybe you could argue it's a different time, but at 11 minutes and 12 seconds starts a scene where a little boy is bathed in this show. The scene goes on for maybe 10 minutes. Dad repeatedly fumbles under the water and says, "You made me lose my soap, Rusty, fiddling in this bath." This child is in an actual bathtub or a prop bathtub on this set. You cannot see any underwear. You cannot see, below the water. But this is a boy that is made to appear naked on a sitcom that is filmed in front of a live audience. And there's fumbling and jokes in the water. All right. And then at 14 minutes and 27 seconds, Dad says, "Sweetie, when you get older," oh, actually, Mom says this, "Sweetie, when you get older, you're going to find that dancing with men is 10% dancing and 90% defending yourself." At 16 minutes and 29 seconds, the little girl says, "Do you really think I'll be able to trap Daddy?" to her mom. Her mom says, "Of course, darling, I've been trapping Daddy for years." She responds, "But you have so much more experience. I'm only 11. And Mom responds, "The 11-year-olds of today are the trappers of tomorrow." And then at 17 minutes and 50 seconds, when the little girl is saying that she doesn't want to go to the dance anymore, she says, "No, I won't go. And do you know what we'll do instead? We'll play horsey." I should mention that the entire plot of that episode of Make Room for Daddy was about the little 11-year-old girl wanting to go to a dance for the first time, and she very much looked all of 11 max. And it sexualized her the entire time, made her into a second wife for this dad character. And you might excuse it. You might say that that's just what the times were like, that it's not weird. It's only weird because we make it weird. But I think that we need to start making it weird, because that's how these people get away with this right in front of our face, is because we're gaslighting each other and telling each other that there's nothing weird about it. We're just overthinking it. When we look at Quiet on the Set, there's a story told about an Amanda Bynes character being named something Taint. And they're in a room and somebody's like, hey, is that appropriate? And Dan Schneider's like, how dare you? You're weird for thinking that, blah, blah, blah. They want us to think that we're the weird ones. They want us to think that these things that they're showing us are normal. They have coaxed us into believing that they're normal. And we have to say they're not normal in order for any of this to change. After the 1950s, I decided to jump another 20 years to the 1970s, and I picked a random episode of The Brady Bunch, Season 2, Episode 3, The Slumber Caper, and I saw something straight out of what is supposedly the Dan Schneider playbook, having young girls eat phallic-shaped food. At 17 minutes through this episode, the group of over 12 girls aged 10 to 13 all eat hot dogs for 2 minutes while they're talking. They're just also eating hot dogs in their pajamas on the floor. They also rub each other's backs and lay down together in this sleepover episode. Now, of course, eating hot dogs in and of itself, rubbing each other's backs, that's not weird sleepover behavior. But it is absolutely an avoidable choice when you are deciding what food all of these little girls are going to eat. When you choose a hot dog, that's a choice when pizza was right there. The sexualization of children in Hollywood and the history of sexualization of children in Hollywood is so easy to find. It is painfully easy to find. It's right on the surface, just like it's always been. Just like this Dan Schneider stuff was right in front of our faces. It's always been there. And these are the episodes that have stood the test of time, because with these old shows, the networks have wiped most of the more controversial episodes from any streaming platform, or you can't find them on the internet. But these aren't those episodes. These are the episodes that are still available for everyone, that have not been questioned. Dan Schneider eroded the instincts of the parents of the kids on his sets slowly over time so that they would accept grosser and grosser jokes and worse treatment. Some parents needed less convincing than others because they were already willing to serve their child up on a silver platter from day one, but some parents on Dan Schneider projects went into those projects with good intentions, or what they felt like were good intentions. But Dan isn't just slowly convincing the people on set to accept his behavior. He is convincing the parents at home to accept his behavior, to write off things that alert them, that send up their red flags, that make their instincts say, this is weird, this is not right. He convinces them that those instincts are wrong and that it's all just kid nonsense. You could argue that when SpongeBob puts underwear on his head and his nose suddenly looks like something else, or when the twins flash their high beams at Lightning McQueen in the movie Cars, that isn't harming any children, because children did not have to be involved in the making of those animated scenes. But when it comes to Dan Schneider's work, and work like Dan Schneider's work, it is actual children performing these adult jokes. For who? I think there's a general acceptance of adult jokes and content made for children. A lot of people see it as the producers, directors, etc., just throwing a bone, a metaphorical bone, to the parents in the audience who are trudging through the exhausting and awful experience of watching something with their children. And I think that we could stand to be a little bit more critical of these adult jokes being thrown into children's content, and we could stand to be a bit more bored as adults. There doesn't need to be a second level that the show works on that is entertaining to the adults, because if we're prioritizing content that has these two layers, this adult layer and this child's layer, who are we asking to make this type of content? I think we could stand to be a lot more critical of who we allow to be the front runners of the child entertainment industry. But we're in a different era of media than we were in when Dan Schneider was at the peak of his popularity. A lot of kids don't watch shows like we used to. They watch YouTube. And who is on YouTube making the content for your children? Family vloggers, of course. And everything that Dan Schneider got away with, he got away with in front of parents, in front of a slew of other adults. Meanwhile, the kids that are in family vlogs, there are no legal protections for them. There are no mandated hours that they can and cannot work. And there is no studio teacher standing between them and their parents' dangerous or morally unsound ideas. As long as Hollywood has existed, children have been exploited in Hollywood. As long as social media has existed, children have been exploited on social media. We have stood by and watched as child star after child star goes through tragic downfall after tragic downfall, and we say how sorry we feel for them, that they had such a huge impact on our childhood, that this is just so sad. But how much do we really care about them? Do we care enough to sacrifice anything for them? Would you be willing to give up shows that are led by children or wait longer for shows that are led by children if the laws were changed to accommodate school for every child in Hollywood? If you could go back and change it so that some of the child stars that have had the most tragic downfalls never had to go through what they went through, would you? Or would that be too much of a sacrifice for your childhood? If we actually want any change for the kids in Hollywood and for the kids on social media, it has to be us demanding the change, because it's not going to be the production studios and it's not going to be the family vloggers that are saying that they want more regulations. We have to be the ones to say that, and say it consistently and insistently, that we don't want any more shows that are exploitative towards the children that worked on them, that we're willing to sacrifice on the types of media we have access to if it means a better and safer life for kids. I think the biggest obstacle to change for kids in Hollywood and for kids on social media is us, and the fact that ultimately we don't care as much as we say we do. Though we may say we feel sorry for these kids and their lack of childhood, ultimately a lot of us think that they're living a privileged life, having these big houses and cars and other luxuries. A lot of us really do feel like that outweighs what they've gone through and how exposed they were. And I think that if we keep questioning that belief that more money means something that's worthwhile to a child, that we'll get to the point where we won't let stuff like Dan Schneider happen again. That's my hope. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video or got something out of it. My name's Caroline. You've got this.